Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a sweet and totally swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in. The music rose like an eternal invitation. Crystal chandeliers glimmered above, casting light over hundreds of joyful, or pretended to be joyful faces in the lavish ballroom of the Grand Marlborough Hotel. Cassie Miller stood backstage, her hand icy cold around the bridal bouquet. The scent of white roses mixed with expensive perfume made her nauseous. "You just have to walk down that aisle, say I do, and everything will be fine," her mother whispered, a rigid smile frozen on her face. "The Ward family is our company's golden partner. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity or a lifelong sentence? Cassie gave a small laugh, thin as a thread about to snap. The prep room door creaked open. At the end of the flower-strewn aisle stood a man in a black tuxedo, tall and proud like a monument. Gavin Ward, powerful businessman, sugar-coated words, eyes sharp as knives. A week ago, she thought he was perfect, charming, wealthy, always showing up with the right bouquet at the right moment. Then she saw his other side, the one the staff tried to hide behind stiff collars and trembling, "Yes, sir." It started with a bruise on a backstage cleaner's wrist. "I just slipped." The girl avoided Cassie's eyes. Then a timid security guard showed her a video on his phone. Gavin gripping a woman's shoulder, snarling, "You think you can embarrass me?" That woman, Gavin's ex, was sobbing, voiceless. And this very morning, right before the ceremony, Cassie saw Gavin grab a waiter by the collar for spilling a few drops of wine. His grip turned the boy pale. "All for business," Gavin always said. What kind of business required violence? Cassie looked at herself in the mirror, a stunning white gown hugging her waist, cascading like a wave, a veil draped down her back. She looked like a sugar and salt princess, fragile enough to melt in the rain. The pipe organ swelled from the grand hall. Her chest tightened. "Better to die soaked in rain than live a lifetime in a golden cage," she whispered to herself. Then suddenly she turned, flung the veil back, hiked up her dress, and ran. "Cassie!" her mother shrieked. A bridesmaid grabbed her sleeve and slipped. Cassie dashed down the hallway, heels clacking like war drums on the marble floor. She burst through the back door and inhaled sharply. Rain slapped her face like a slap. The storm had rolled in out of nowhere. Wind whipped around her, and rain poured down in sheets. Makeup smeared. Mascara streaked in twin lines beneath her eyes. "Great," she muttered. "Hello, Panda Bride." No umbrella. No plan B. Just a borrowed sedan parked sneakily behind the hotel. She lifted her skirt, splashed through puddles, opened the car door, and crawled in like a drenched cat. "Go!" she whispered, pressing the ignition. The engine sputtered, then died. She tried again. And again. All she got was clicking and a whiff of burning wires. "Don't do this to me," Cassie whispered, tapping the steering wheel. Outside, lightning slashed the sky. Through the foggy windshield, she saw winding roads leading toward hills, and beyond them, sparse woods. She made a decision. Get out. Rain whipped her face. The dress clung to her skin like a giant, soggy shower curtain. Clutching the bouquet like a flotation device, she trudged up the narrow dirt path. "If I freeze to death tonight," she mumbled, "please write in my obituary. Died due to catastrophic fashion choices." The wind howled through the pine trees. A wooden sign appeared through the rain, faintly lit by stone lanterns behind a rusty iron gate. "Coal Estate." "Coal?" she sniffled, breath fogging in the cold. "Who lives out here?" She gripped the gate, her hand slipping on the wet iron. Then her foot missed a step. She fell forward and splat, rolled into the mud like a failed sushi roll. Her bouquet landed headfirst in the grass. "Ow!" Pain stabbed her hip. "Perfect. Cassie Miller, dirtiest bride of the year." She pushed herself up, dragging the dress, and stumbled to the gate buzzer. She pressed. No response. She pressed again. The bell echoed faintly. Seconds later, a yellow light flicked on along the stone path, leading to a dark-toned mansion with a sloped roof and wide windows. In the gray rain, the house looked somber, almost stern. The front door creaked open. A tall man stepped onto the porch, wearing a charcoal sweater and jeans, holding a flashlight. The beam swept across her muddy face, down the drenched wedding gown, and finally stopped on her broken high heel. He raised a brow. Is this some kind of new costume trend? It's not Halloween, Cassie snapped, gripping the gate. I'm a bride. I just ran away from my wedding. I need shelter and tea, maybe a new life too. The man paused, the flashlight circling back, as if checking she wasn't a rain-induced hallucination. Are you drunk? Only on life, Cassie said, lifting her chin with what dignity she had left. I'll explain. After I stop shivering. He exhaled slowly, then pressed a button. The iron gate creaked open. Come in, he said, voice low and weary. Follow the stone path. Watch the steps. Cassie stumbled forward, her every step squelching with water. The porch was wide, dark wood gleaming, coat hooks on the wall, and a doormat that looked ready to sue her for offending its fibers. The man pointed. Shoes! She obediently sat, tugging off her mud-soaked heels. The broken heel thunked onto the floor. Sorry, she said, voice shaky but eyes sparkling with sarcasm. I just lost a battle with gravity. He glanced at the shoe, then her, then the muddy trail. Wait here. He disappeared. She heard a cabinet open, caught the scent of clean fabric and warm wood. He returned with a large towel and a black hoodie. Thanks. She grabbed the towel and wrapped it around her shoulders, warmth blooming across her back. He placed the hoodie on a chair, then looked her in the eye. Dark, deep, unnervingly calm, like a lake that kept its secrets. What's your name? Cassie Miller. She swallowed. And you? Evan, he replied shortly. Evan Cole. Cole. Cassie glanced around. A wide hallway, a stone fireplace, black and white art, and bookshelves reaching the ceiling. The house was almost too tidy, like its owner couldn't tolerate a single speck of dust. Warm, elegant, but understated. Not a ranch, not a normal person's house, if she were honest. Listen, Evan, she began, tightening the towel. I know this sounds insane, but my fiancé, Gavin Ward, isn't a good man. He hurts people. He choked his ex. He mistreats his staff. I couldn't marry someone like that just to secure a family alliance. So I ran, and the sky decided to dump a bucket over my head for dramatic effect. Evan listened silently, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he were shielding himself without showing it. At the word hurts, his jaw tightened, barely. Are you going to report him? He asked. I will. Tomorrow. She sighed. But tonight, I just need a place to stay. One night. I'm not dangerous, not armed, unless you count a ruined bouquet as a psychological weapon. He tilted his head at the wilted bouquet in her arms. Weapon of mass emotional destruction. Exactly, Cassie gave a tired chuckle, especially on feelings. He stood quiet a beat longer, measuring something only he could see. Rain tapped steadily on the windows. Finally he nodded, voice low but firm. One night. You leave in the morning. A dry pause passed. Cassie pouted, then pushed back. One night's not enough. I need at least a week to recover emotionally. Evan raised an eyebrow. A week? Okay, 3 days. Or 2.5. I'm an excellent negotiator. She winked, hunting for humor in her still quivering throat. His mouth twitched slightly, like a man unfamiliar with smiling, but considering it. One night, he repeated, and I'll call a mechanic first thing. You're an angel. Cassie hugged the bouquet tighter, a reflex clutch of a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. A grumpy angel, but still an angel. Don't promote me too fast. He turned, gesturing. Living room's to the left. Get warm, don't soak the rug, and toss those poor shoes in the trash. Aye, aye, Cassie saluted, nearly slipping before grabbing a chair. Oops, I'm good. The living room was warm, a small fire crackling in the stone fireplace. On the table sat an electric kettle and some peppermint tea bags. Cassie let the towel fall and gazed at the flames like they were a miracle. She closed her eyes for a second, feeling her shoulders drop a level. Lighter. Do you need to call anyone? Evan asked from the doorway. a pillar of chilly air. On a day like this, Cassie opened her eyes and laughed hoarsely. I don't want to hear my mom yelling. I'll text my best friend after I look human again. Evan nodded, handed her a cordless landline phone. Your cell? Lost during the escape, probably swimming somewhere in the parking lot. She cradled the phone, falling silent. In that hush, the rain sounded like a blanket wrapping the world. Evan, she called as he turned to go. He paused. Thank you, Cassie said, no longer smiling. I know I'm a soaked mess of a person, but thank you for opening the door. His gaze softened half a degree. Don't make me regret it. I'll try, she shrugged, pulling the hoodie toward her, and I promise not to attack your interior design again. Evan disappeared. The door clicked shut. Cassie stood still, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. She exhaled, so deeply her chest felt hollow. Then she laid the ruined bouquet on the table, unpinned the veil, and began undoing the waterlogged hair clips. Outside, the storm still roared. Inside, the fire whispered. Between a canceled wedding and an unknown morning, Cassie smiled faintly. She had fled a gilded cage only to land on the porch of a stranger with eyes like a midnight lake. One night, he'd said. A week, she bargained. The truth would make its own deal. But tonight, all she needed was warmth and a cup of peppermint tea. And, maybe, just maybe, the tiniest new beginning hidden somewhere in the sound of the rain. Soft morning light filtered through the thick curtains, scattering warm rays across the living room rug. Cassie stirred on the oversized sofa, Evan's black hoodie swallowing her whole. The lingering warmth from the fireplace made it feel like she had just dreamed a strange dream. The escape, the storm, the mansion, a grumpy man. But no, it wasn't a dream. The scent of freshly roasted coffee reached her nose, and footsteps, steady, unhurried, were drawing near. Cassie opened her eyes. Evan stood at the doorway, clad in a charcoal gray sweater, holding a mug of coffee. In contrast to the cozy warmth around her, his gaze was sharp and cold, like a polished blade. Leave, he said flatly, placing the mug on the table. Cassie sat bolt upright, hair a tangled mess, eyes wide. Leave? Where? Home. Back to your world. I don't run a bed and breakfast for runaway brides, he said, tone hard as of oak. Unyielding. Final. Cassie narrowed her eyes, flipping her hair back with forced composure. Home, huh? You expect me to walk back into that wedding hall, face my furious mother, and say, sorry for bailing mid-downpour. Shall we pick up where we left off? That's your business, Evan replied, arms crossed, gaze like ice. But not mine. Grab your things and go. Cassie bit her lip, then cleared her throat as if preparing for a grand speech. Dear cranky host, there are a few minor reasons why I temporarily can't leave. Evan raised an eyebrow, waiting. First, Cassie held up a finger. My car's dead. It quit on me the moment it realized I was trying to run away. I think it's secretly loyal to Gavin now. Call a mechanic. My phone's also dead. She held up an empty hand and gave it a little shake for emphasis. It probably ran off with my broken-heeled shoe for a honeymoon. Evan remained silent, brow twitching ever so slightly. Cassie pressed on. And as you can see, it's raining again. If you toss me out now, that's practically murder of a poor, helpless, homeless bride. That last line came out with a trembling voice and deliberately glistening eyes, Oscar-worthy, if she had to say so herself. Evan let out a long sigh, somewhere between exasperated and defeated. You talk too much. Thank you, Cassie beamed like she'd just won Miss Congeniality. He rubbed his temple, then muttered, Fine. A few days. Until the car's fixed. No longer. Cassie exhaled in relief, nearly leaping with joy. But she composed herself quickly, nodding with the grace of someone signing a peace treaty. Deal. I won't be any trouble. But Cassie Miller and no trouble don't belong in the same sentence. Less than an hour later, she showed up at the stables behind the estate. Last night's storm had left muddy puddles everywhere, and the wooden fences were still damp. Wrapped in a borrowed raincoat, clutching a broom, Cassie marched in like she belonged. Hello, handsome boys, she greeted cheerfully, despite her stomach churning at the mix of hay and animal scent. Two chestnut horses raised their heads to look at her, dark, round eyes blinking curiously. Cassie smiled sheepishly. Okay, so I'm not exactly an expert, but I heard if you want to stay longer, it's smart to win over the homeowners' pets. So, friends? She started sweeping, poorly. For every 5 strokes, 2 went wildly off track. Mud splattered her raincoat, and her hair was escaping from the hood. One of the horses snorted and stomped, almost mockingly. Just then, Evan appeared, arms crossed, leaning against the stable door. His expression darkened, but the corner of his mouth twitched ever so slightly, like he was suppressing a laugh. What are you doing? Making a good impression, Cassie replied, wiping sweat from her brow and smearing mud across her forehead. See? I'm great at mucking out stalls. It's like modern art. Looks more like you're losing a fight with the broom. Cassie pouted and turned to the horses. He clearly doesn't understand art, does he? The horses snorted again. Evan shook his head and walked away, but his gaze had softened, just a little. That afternoon, Cassie ventured into the kitchen. It was spacious, with walnut cabinets and a gleaming oven, but cold, like it hadn't seen much use. Cassie took a deep breath and rolled up her sleeves. If I can't prove my worth with cooking, what bargaining chip do I have left? She raided the fridge. Eggs, milk, a few vegetables, and bread. 1 hour later, the kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it. Flour on the floor, a scorched frying pan, and a plate of heart-shaped scrambled eggs that looked more like abstract blobs. Just as she proudly lifted the plate, Evan walked in. He surveyed the war zone. Flour-coated floor, Cassie with a streak of batter on her cheek, clutching a spatula like a weapon. Are you trying to destroy my house? He asked coldly. Nope, I'm saving it with flavor, Cassie said breezily, holding out the eggs. Taste this. I guarantee no one's ever cooked you a burnt heart breakfast quite like this. Evan hesitated. The scowl lingered on his face, but in the end, he took a fork and tried a small bite. A few seconds of silence passed. Not bad, he muttered, setting the fork down. Cassie lit up like she'd won an Oscar. See, I'm useful. If you let me stay a few more days, I can make more exclusive delicacies like this. Don't tempt me with culinary sabotage, Evan said, shaking his head. But the sharpness in his eyes from that morning was gone. That night, Cassie lay on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fireplace glow. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving only the wind rustling through the leaves. Evan passed by and paused for a moment. He looked at her, a petite girl, hair a tangled mess, lips curved slightly as if dreaming something sweet. Just a few days, he reminded himself. But somewhere deep down, he already knew. This runaway bride wasn't leaving so easily. The second morning at Cole Estate began with the smell of coffee. Cassie had planned to do something simple, brew a pot of black coffee to score more points with the grumpy homeowner. It sounded perfectly reasonable in her head, but theory rarely matched reality. She stood in the middle of the luxurious kitchen, staring wide-eyed at the gleaming espresso machine that looked more like a mini spaceship. Lights blinked, buttons glowed with tiny, unreadable labels. All right, you rich people monster, Cassie muttered. I will not be defeated by a chunk of metal. I ran away from a wedding, for heaven's sake. I can handle a machine. 10 minutes later, the kitchen floor was foaming, and the coffee filter was overflowing with blotchy brown liquid. Cassie grabbed a glass carafe, trying desperately to catch the spray. Oh no, stop! I didn't order a refill! The machine finally stopped with a cold, smug-sounding beep. Cassie exhaled, staring at the sad excuse for coffee, now sloshing in the carafe, smelling faintly burnt. She picked it up and told herself, it's fine. Coffee is still coffee. As long as it has caffeine, who cares what it looks like? The living room basked in soft sunlight streaming through large windows, illuminating the classic walnut furniture. Cassie walked in, trembling slightly as she carried the glass carafe and set it down on the tea table. Okay, she whispered to herself. New morning, new Cassie. Less trouble, more charm. She poured the coffee into a white porcelain cup, but as she was setting it down, her heel slipped slightly on the thick shag rug. Clatter! The cup tipped sharply and the black liquid rushed across the antique wooden table, soaking into the dark grain like an irreversible ink stain. Cassie froze. Oh no! At that exact moment, Evan appeared at the steps, holding a file folder. He halted at the scene. Cassie holding a tiny napkin, desperately blotting a coffee puddle the size of Europe. His eyes went glacial. What did you just do? Cassie smiled sheepishly and held up the napkin. Introducing modern art? Look, looks like an old map. That's the Atlantic Ocean right there. Evan strode over, set down his files, and pulled out a much larger towel, cleaning the table with surgical precision. So precise, Cassie felt like a certified disaster in comparison. This table is an 18th century antique, he gritted out. I bought it in Florence. Cassie rolled her eyes, then replied nonchalantly, well, now it has more historical value. Living proof of a runaway bride's journey. Think about it. In a few hundred years, people will say, this stain was made by Cassie Miller, legendary wedding escapee. Evan's mouth twitched. He was about to snap back, but paused as he watched Cassie seriously. Pull out a hairdryer and start drying the table. Are you trying to burn my house down? No, I'm saving it. I saw this online. Low heat helps the moisture evaporate faster. She leaned over, her messy curls bouncing, eyes full of determination. Evan looked at her, this tiny woman swimming in his oversized hoodie, earnestly trying to rescue his furniture with a blow-dryer. It was ridiculous and endearing. His anger deflated. You, he started, then stopped, the corner of his mouth curling almost involuntarily. You're a total disaster. Cassie turned off the dryer, put her hands on her hips, and squinted at him. Thank you. I take that as a compliment. A memorable disaster, right? A small chuckle escaped him, quick and unwilling. He immediately pressed his lips together, as if regretting letting the sound out. Cassie's eyes lit up. Oh my God, you can laugh. I thought your smile went extinct with the dinosaurs. He picked up the folder and turned away to hide his face. Don't flatter yourself. I just found you ridiculous. Cassie clapped once. Mission accomplished. I made Mr. Grumpy crack a smile. Someone write that down in my achievement log. Evan shook his head and walked out, but the frost in his eyes had melted just a bit. That afternoon, Cassie returned to the kitchen. This time, she didn't challenge herself with the coffee monster. Instead, she arranged a tray of store-bought cookies, neatly placing them on a plate. Then she added a handwritten note. Sorry for turning your table into a European map. I offer cookies in compensation. Cassie, the runaway bride. Evan found the note that evening when he entered the kitchen for a glass of water. He paused, staring at the round, looping handwriting, fingertips brushing the corner of the paper. His lips tightened, but he couldn't stop the faint smile that flickered across his face. He told himself again, just a few days, but deep down he was starting to realize this loud, chaotic, endlessly optimistic girl had left a small crack in the wall of ice around his heart. The second-floor hallway of Cole Estate was utterly silent, bathed in the soft yellow glow of vintage wall sconces. Cassie, drying her hands on the little apron she'd borrowed from the kitchen, wandered the corridor with curiosity humming in her chest. Evan had practically vanished into his office all morning, leaving her to her own devices. And Cassie was never good at staying still, so she decided to explore a little. Most of the wooden doors were closed tight, polished to a shine that mirrored her reflection. But one stood out. It was darker in color, the doorknob scratched as if it had been gripped tightly, repeatedly. It was slightly ajar. Curiosity killed the cat, Cassie whispered to herself. Yet her hand moved on its own, gently pushing the door open. Inside was a small room, vastly different from the polished elegance of the rest of the estate. The air smelled of aged wood, with a faint trace of faded jasmine. On the shelves, framed photos sat neatly, a young woman laughing under sunlight, her long hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Beside one photo was a worn-out teddy bear and an old MP3 player. Cassie froze. Her heart sank, as though someone had gently pressed down on it. Every object in the room radiated a deep, frozen kind of love, one trapped in a moment that could never move forward. What are you doing in here? The husky voice behind her made Cassie jump, nearly causing her to drop the photo in her hands. She turned. Evan stood at the threshold, face shadowed, his eyes cold and sharp as a mountain in winter. Cassie stammered, then sighed. I'm sorry. The door was open. I couldn't resist. He stepped inside and closed the door, his posture rigid as a wall. His eyes fell on the photo of the young woman. For a brief moment, all the coldness melted, replaced by a sorrow that ran deep and silent. My sister, he said quietly. Sophia. Cassie stood still, hugging the picture frame to her chest like it might shatter. I was too busy with work, Evan continued, his voice rough with restraint. She called me, wanted me to pick her up, but I was late. The accident happened. I didn't make it in time. I couldn't protect her. He sat down in a chair by the window, his hands curling into fists. Shadows fell across his face, making the veins on the back of his hands stand out. I let ambition take the one thing I truly cared about. His words came low and hoarse. What was left for me to hold on to after that? I gave everything up, walked away from it all, just to hide inside this shell. Cassie stood quietly, heart tightening. She realized she was seeing a different Evan, not the cold, closed-off man, but someone imprisoned by grief. She gently placed the photo back on the shelf, then walked over and sat across from him. For a few seconds, she said nothing, only looked at him with quiet understanding. Finally, she offered a soft smile, almost hesitant, as if afraid even a smile might hurt him. You know, I think if you keep holding on to this pain, the wrinkles on your forehead might actually sue you. Evan blinked, startled. Seriously, Cassie continued, resting her chin on her palm. I could represent them in court. Grounds for the lawsuit, being required to arrive too early and too frequently. Damages claimed 1 full bottle of anti-aging cream. And just like that, the thick silence cracked. The corner of Evan's mouth twitched. A short, genuine laugh escaped, deep, gravelly, and completely unrestrained. Cassie's eyes widened, surprised. Then she smiled. Aha! I heard it. Evan Cole can laugh. Who would have thought? He shook his head, but the laughter hadn't quite faded from his eyes. You are such a menace. True, but a useful menace. Cassie shrugged. If a dumb joke can make you laugh, I'll tell 1,000 more. Evan looked at her, and his gaze softened. For a fleeting moment, Cassie felt like the room grew a little warmer, like Sophia, somewhere, was smiling with them. He turned away, voice low. Don't come in here again. I'm not ready. Okay, Cassie nodded, rising to her feet. But before opening the door, she said gently, when you are ready, I'll be here. Not to replace anyone, just to remind you that you can still laugh. Evan didn't respond, but behind her, he closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. And for the first time in years, the weight of his grief lifted, just a little. Morning mist still clung to the old pine trees surrounding Cole Estate, and a chilly breeze slipped through the wide windows. Cassie woke up on the familiar sofa, stretching out, her messy brown curls bouncing as she yawned. Her face was fresh and cheerful until she spotted Evan's tall figure standing at the living room doorway. Arms crossed, his eyes had darkened like a storm cloud about to burst. It's time for you to leave, he said, voice low and even, neither loud nor harsh, but with an unshakable finality. Cassie blinked a few times, then pouted. Why are you so cruel? Haven't you noticed I've completely bonded with your pets? If I leave now, they might spiral into depression. Evan stayed silent, as if weighing whether to physically toss her out the front gate or call a vet to assess the mental health of his animals. Cassie continued, not missing a beat. You should have seen it yesterday. Your gray cat fell asleep on my legs. That proves I have animal therapy powers. And your black dog? He licked my hand, then wagged his tail like he was doing the samba. If I disappear, I'm pretty sure he'll be so heartbroken he'll file a lawsuit in pet court. The corner of Evan's mouth twitched. He turned away to hide the fleeting smile, but Cassie had already caught it. Ha! You smiled! That's strong evidence I'm allowed to stay, she said triumphantly. Evan took a deep breath, turned back, eyes narrowed in warning. You think just because the pets like you You get to invade my house? Exactly. Cassie gave him a thumbs up, beaming. While Evan left with a look of half resignation, Cassie darted straight to the kitchen. For her, this place was a battlefield, but one she was willing to die on. Last time, she had turned the kitchen into a map of Europe with spilled coffee. Today, she planned to make amends. She opened the fridge and found flour, eggs, milk, and some dark chocolate. Perfect. This is going to be a masterpiece. 3 hours later, the kitchen was filled with the smell of flour, sugar, butter, and a hint of smoke. Yet somehow, miraculously, a tray of round, albeit uneven cookies emerged from the oven. Cassie took a deep breath, proudly packed them into a tin, and stuck a messy little note on top. A gift for Mrs. Edna, the neighbor. Heard she lives alone. Thought she could use some sweetness. Cassie, the runaway bride. Throwing on a coat, she skipped over to the small house just beyond the property. An elderly woman with silver hair opened the door, blinking in surprise at Cassie's clearly not a housekeeper look. "You are?" the woman asked, voice slightly shaky. "I'm a temporary guest at Evan Cole's house," Cassie said brightly, offering the tin. "I heard you live alone. These cookies aren't the prettiest, but I promise they're sweet." The woman's eyes softened, emotion flickering across her face. "Thank you, dear. It's been a long time since someone knocked on my door just to give me cookies." Cassie stayed and chatted for 10 minutes, listening to stories about Edna's solitary days and how Evan often dropped off groceries without a word. In Cassie's mind, the image of the cold, aloof man slowly changed. Not just a wall of ice, but someone who quietly cared. That evening, Evan returned home to find Cassie in the kitchen, hands dusted with flour, the scent of cookies still lingering in the air. "What are you planning to ruin this time?" he asked from the doorway, his voice laced with dry sarcasm. "Nothing," Cassie said matter-of-factly. "I just saved your reputation with the neighbors. Mrs. Edna got her cookies and now thinks you're a saint. I'd say your kindness score just went up a few points. Thanks to me." Evan frowned. "You gave her cookies?" "Yep, and she was really happy. You know, sometimes showing you care doesn't take money, just a little flour and sugar." Cassie winked. He stared at her, eyes darkening slightly. Clearly, he wasn't used to people inserting themselves into his quiet, disciplined life. But instead of anger, there was something else. Confusion, maybe. A kind of vulnerability that flickered across his face, like he had no idea how to handle someone who broke into the spaces he kept tightly locked. With a quiet sigh, he dropped his keys on the table. "Fine. Stay." Cassie blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Stay? For real? But don't read into it," he added, voice lower now as his eyes held hers. "This is temporary, and—" he paused, tone firm. "Don't step into my life." Cassie tilted her head, a small smile curving her lips. "Too late, Evan Cole. I already have." That night, Cassie lay on the sofa, hugging a soft pillow, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. She thought of the stories Edna had shared, of Sophia's memory room, and of Evan's quiet confession. That ambition had cost him the one thing he held dear. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside her chest, Cassie felt something warm and unfamiliar. She wasn't just running away anymore. She might have just found a place to pause, to breathe, even if the grumpy homeowner hadn't realized it yet. Elsewhere, just down the hallway, Evan stood still, watching her through the slightly cracked door. That small, messy girl, so loud, so chaotic, had somehow made his cold house feel alive. He curled his fingers into a loose fist and told himself again, just a few days. But deep down, he knew. Once Cassie Miller walked in, no wall would ever be enough to keep her out. Morning at Cole Estate was so quiet, Cassie felt like she'd woken up inside a giant oil painting. Mist drifting lazily across the pine trees, distant hills bathed in pale sunlight. In the midst of this peaceful scene, she sat curled up on the sofa, wrapped in Evan's oversized hoodie, her messy brown curls sticking out, legs tucked under a blanket. It was all perfectly calm until Evan showed up. He stood in the doorway, tall and solid, a dark sweater hugging his broad shoulders, his eyes so deep and black that they seemed to bring the chill of the morning fog with him. Cassie's heart jumped, not from fear, but from the way he looked at her, like someone caught stealing peace from a place it didn't belong. "It's time for you to leave," Evan said, voice low and final, like a verdict handed down without appeal. Cassie raised her brows, clutching the pillow like an invisible shield. "Leave? Already? I haven't even tried all the teas in your kitchen yet." "This isn't a hotel," he said coldly. "Pack your things." Cassie took a deep breath, then pouted like a kid being forced to eat vegetables. "Haven't you noticed I've bonded with your pets? If I leave now, they might fall into a deep depression." Evan frowned. "That's a ridiculous excuse." "It's not," Cassie insisted, eyes wide and sparkly. "The gray cat slept on my legs last night. Clearly, I've been promoted to official pillow. And your black dog? He licked my hand and wagged his tail like he was doing the cha-cha. If I vanish, I swear he'll sue you in pet court." Evan's mouth twitched, as if he was struggling not to laugh. He turned away, grumbling. "You're unbelievably annoying." "Thank you. I take that as a compliment," Cassie replied cheerfully. Determined to prove her usefulness, Cassie sneaked into the kitchen. Last time she'd turned it into a coffee disaster zone. This time she was going to redeem herself. She found flour, eggs, butter, and decided to make cookies. "They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach," she muttered as she stirred the dough messily. "And if not his heart, maybe at least his fridge." An hour later, the kitchen smelled of flour and faint smoke. Cassie coughed through the haze, but eventually managed to pull a tray of slightly deformed round cookies from the oven. She panted triumphantly, packed them into a tin, and carried them off like a war trophy. To the elderly neighbor Mrs. Edna had mentioned the day before. When she knocked on the small cottage door, an old woman with silver hair peeked out, eyes filled with surprise. "And you are?" the woman asked gently. "I'm staying at Evans for a bit," Cassie said with a bright smile, holding out the tin. "I heard you live alone, so I brought something sweet. Homemade cookies. Shapes are a little artistic." The woman's eyes softened with emotion. "Thank you, dear. It's been so long since anyone knocked just to bring me cookies." Cassie sat and chatted for a while, listening as Edna shared memories of living alone, and how Evan occasionally dropped off groceries without ever staying to talk. Cassie's heart warmed. That cold, closed-off man. Maybe he wasn't made of ice after all. When Cassie returned, Evan was already in the kitchen, arms crossed. The scent of cookies still lingered in the air. "What did you destroy this time?" he asked, his tone somewhere between stern and weary. "Nothing. I just improved your reputation," Cassie said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Edna got her cookies and said you're a kind soul. Your kindness rating just skyrocketed thanks to me." Evan frowned. "You brought her cookies?" "Yep, and she was really happy. Sometimes caring isn't about money. It's about flour and sugar." Cassie winked. He looked at her, something uncertain flickering in his eyes. Like he wasn't used to someone reaching into the part of him he tried to hide. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, you can stay, but only for a few days." Cassie lit up, eyes sparkling like she'd just won the lottery. "Amazing. I promise not to be too much trouble, unless you count breathing as a disturbance." Evan turned away, shaking his head. "Don't step into my life." The words sounded like a steel wall slamming shut. But this time, Cassie didn't joke. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, voice unexpectedly gentle, "Thank you for letting me stay. I know you don't like being bothered, but honestly, I don't know where else to go. It feels like the whole world slammed its door in my face." Evan stopped mid-step. Her words hit him straight in the chest. Cassie lowered her gaze, clutching the hem of the hoodie, her smile faint, eyes vulnerable. "You don't know what this means to me. Without you, I'd probably still be wandering outside, soaked and hopeless. So, thank you." Evan turned his face away to hide his expression, but something inside him tightened. Since losing Sophia, he hadn't let anyone get close enough to touch his loneliness. And yet somehow, this chaotic girl had done it, with a single sentence. "Get some sleep," he said quietly, his voice no longer sharp. "The sky will clear tomorrow." Cassie looked at him, a soft smile forming. She thought to herself, "Too late, Evan Cole. I'm already in." Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. That morning, Cassie woke up alone in the massive echoing house. Evan had left early, leaving behind an unfamiliar silence. She stood by the living room window, gazing out at the misty yard where a few horses were peacefully grazing. "Definitely a ranch owner," she murmured, lips curling into a smile. "Who else wakes up this early if not to feed horses, check fences, and count acres?" She chuckled to herself, threw on Evan's oversized hoodie, and began another expedition around the house. For Cassie, curiosity was practically a vital organ. One door caught her attention, a narrow wooden one leading downward. Intrigued, she pushed it open. A spiral staircase descended into dim yellow light. Biting her lip, heart racing, she whispered, "What if this is where he hides treasure? Or bodies? Hey, I shouldn't rule anything out." Reaching the bottom, Cassie froze. A full wine cellar stretched out before her, its stone walls chilled and lined with vintage racks. Hundreds of bottles filled the wooden shelves, each label glowing under the soft light. Names she'd only heard in movies, some likely worth more than a car. "Oh my God," she breathed, eyes wide. "This isn't a wine cellar. This is a mini museum. What kind of regular ranch owner has this?" She tiptoed over, picked up a bottle, butchered the French name under her breath, and shook it gently. "Maybe he's a smuggler or an undercover spy." "What are you doing down here?" A deep voice startled her so badly she almost dropped the bottle. Evan stood at the foot of the stairs, his silhouette stretched across the cold stone floor. "I was just exploring," Cassie said quickly, setting the bottle back. "What are you hiding down here? Don't tell me you're an international assassin." Something flickered in Evan's eyes, then vanished, replaced by his usual chill. He walked forward, grabbed a glass, and poured a drink with cool precision. "Just wine. Some people collect it." Cassie raised a brow, arms crossed. "Some people, maybe. But you? Most folks keep a couple of bottles in the kitchen. You've got a five-star hotel's worth. Not exactly subtle." He took a slow sip, offering no response. His shoulders subtly stiffened, like invisible armor settling into place. Cassie tilted her head, eyes sparkling. "Let me guess. You were a brilliant engineer who invented something insane, sold the company for a fortune, and after a tragedy, you dropped it all and disappeared." Evan placed the glass down and looked at her. For a moment there was confusion, surprise even, in his gaze. But he said coldly, "Think what you want. Or maybe you're the heir to a huge ranch empire, rich since your great-grandfather's time. After some heartbreak, you decided to get out of the business world and hide out here," she continued confidently. "See? I'm good at this." The corner of Evan's mouth twitched, like he was halfway between laughing and sighing. He turned away, returning the bottle to its place. Cassie narrowed her eyes, triumphant. "Aha! You didn't deny it. That means I got at least half of it right. I'll keep your secret, I promise. Unless someone bribes me with a truckload of cupcakes." Evan let out a short, low chuckle and quickly turned his back. That night they shared a simple dinner Cassie had made, slightly burnt scrambled eggs and tomato salad. Cassie, of course, continued her interrogation between bites. "You know, Evan, you're not dangerous. You're just a man who once wanted too much and lost something precious. Now you've chosen a quiet life. Honestly, I find that kind of admirable." He paused mid-bite, looking up at her. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Cassie didn't see him as someone to be feared, just a broken man trying to keep going. Resting her chin on her hand, she broke the heaviness with a grin. "But if I'm wrong about everything, just admit it now. Are you actually an international assassin?" Evan laughed this time, deep and genuine. The sound echoed through the kitchen, a space once filled only with the clinking of pans and silence. "You really don't stop, do you?" he asked. "Nope." Cassie grinned, raising her spoon like a sword. "And you're not escaping my questions. Sooner or later, I'll figure out who you really are." Evan shook his head, hiding the rare smile that tugged at his lips. Late that night, Cassie lay curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket. Images of Evan drifted through her mind. To her, he wasn't some vanished billionaire or a man of mystery. He was just someone who'd worked too hard, wanted too much, lost his sister, and chose to disappear. She whispered before drifting off, "You're just a former engineer, a wealthy ranch owner, a regular man, and I'll prove that you can laugh, live, and start over." Upstairs, Evan stood at the window, a glass of wine in hand. He knew Cassie's guesses were way off, but oddly enough, her being wrong brought him a strange comfort, because in her eyes, he wasn't a headline or a ghost from the past. He was just a man. And for the first time in years, he felt grateful that someone could see him that way. Late morning sunlight bathed the little meadow behind the estate in gold. The grass swayed gently in the breeze. Horses grazed peacefully, creating a scene so serene it felt like a painting. Cassie stood before a tall brown horse, eyes wide, murmuring under her breath, I, I don't think I've ever stood this close to anything this big, except maybe a skyscraper." Evan tilted his head, a subtle glint of amusement flickering in his gray eyes. One he didn't even realize was there. "His name's Storm. He's gentle. As long as you don't scream, he won't do anything." "Oh, great," Cassie muttered. "Gentle sounds an awful lot like just enough to land me in the ER. Still, she reached out and laid a trembling hand on the horse's mane. Storm exhaled warmly onto her fingers. Evan stood behind her, one hand holding the reins, his voice calm and steady. "Climb on, I've got you." Cassie glanced sideways at him, frowning. "If I fall, you're responsible. No pulling your stoic stranger act and walking away." "I've never walked away from someone once I made a promise." Something in the way he said it made Cassie pause. Her heart thudded. There was something too real, too raw in that voice. She bit her lip, then gathered her courage and climbed up. Evan stayed close, one hand steadying her waist, the other adjusting her posture. His closeness sent a rush of heat to her cheeks. She caught the faint scent of pine and soap lingering on him. "Sit up straight. Don't stiffen your whole body." "Easy for you to say," she muttered. "I'm just casually sitting on a 1,000-pound animal. Totally normal." Evan raised a brow and gently tugged the reins. "I'll walk him. Just keep your balance." The Storm began to move, its hooves thudding softly against the ground. Cassie gripped the saddle like her life depended on it, whispering repeatedly, "Don't fall. Don't fall." Evan walked beside her, occasionally glancing up. The sight of her tense and gripping the saddle with everything she had made the corner of his mouth twitch. "You don't have to brace like you're carrying the weight of the world." "I'm preparing for the apocalypse, thank you very much." Her dry reply earned a short laugh from him. After a few slow rounds around the field, Cassie began to relax. She loosened her grip slightly, even dared to lean forward and gently pat Storm's neck. "See? Not so scary after all." "Might be I've got some hidden cowboy genes," she said proudly, but just as she finished the sentence, Storm gave a small toss of his head, and she lost her balance. "Ah!" Cassie tipped sideways. Evan reached for her, but the fall was too quick. They both tumbled into the soft grass with a rush of wind and rustling leaves. Cassie landed with a thud, right on top of him. Her heart pounded wildly as she opened her eyes and realized Evan's face was just inches away. His breath warmed her cheek, and before she could move, their lips brushed, soft, unintentional, but real enough to make the world fall silent. Cassie froze. Her mind blanked. Her face burned like someone had poured an entire bottle of wine over her. Scrambling up, she stammered, I think taxis are safer than horses. Taxis have never kissed me before." Evan raised an eyebrow, lips twitching with amusement. "Are you sure? I've heard some taxi drivers can be quite friendly." Cassie shot him a glare. "Don't joke. That was my first kiss with a horse-related traffic accident." Evan sat up, brushing grass off his shirt. For once, his eyes held a rare mix of surprise and something almost delighted. "You're completely impossible." Cassie patted her chest dramatically. "Well, if I'm impossible, consider me your personal patience test. I'm training you to become a full-fledged Zen monk." This time Evan couldn't hold it back. A low, soft laugh escaped him, and Cassie's heart fluttered so hard she almost clutched it. She mumbled, mostly to herself, hoping he didn't hear. "Great. I haven't even tamed the horse yet, and now someone's stolen my heart." Evan turned toward her. "What was that?" Cassie jolted. "I said, the horse is really cute. Very cute." Evan tilted his head, watching her, the rare smile still playing on his lips. And in that quiet, awkward, electric moment, Cassie thought, I may have saddled the wrong horse, but I definitely kissed the jackpot. That morning, Cassie walked into town to pick up ingredients for baking. Evan had left early, like always. She carried a cloth tote bag, her curls hastily tied up, looking for all the world like a runaway bride pretending to be an ordinary housewife. While waiting outside the bakery, her eyes drifted toward the nearby newsstand, and then her heart stopped. Splashed across the front page, the bold headline screamed, "Evan Cole, missing billionaire, found living in seclusion." Beneath it, a clear photo of Evan, that familiar tall frame, the sharp, stoic face. Unmistakable. Cassie felt like lightning had struck her spine. She snatched the newspaper off the rack, eyes scanning every line. The article detailed everything. Evan Cole, once the visionary behind Cole Global, a multi-billion-dollar empire, had vanished from the business world 4 years ago after a family tragedy. Speculation had swirled ever since. Some said he'd left the country for treatment, others whispered about a political scandal. But now the press had tracked him down, living like a ghost in a remote country estate. The paper burned hot in Cassie's hand. "Oh my God," she whispered, vision blurring. Evan Cole, the name echoed across headlines, the man the world had been looking for, was the same man sharing burnt tomato salads with her, the same grumpy ranch owner she'd teased mercilessly. Clutching the paper to her chest, she left the market in a daze, her thoughts spiraling. When Evan returned, Cassie was waiting in the living room, standing tall but visibly shaken. Her eyes blazed with a mix of hurt and fury. On the table, the newspaper lay open, his face taking up half the page. Evan froze in the doorway. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" Cassie asked, voice low and hoarse. "Do you not trust me enough to tell the truth?" The silence thickened. Evan stepped forward slowly, his expression darkening. He looked at the paper, then at her. "I didn't want you to know." Cassie let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't want me to know? You told me about your sister, about your pain. I thought you trusted me, but clearly, I'm still just an outsider. What did you think I'd do? Sell your secret to the tabloids?" "Cassie..." Evan took another step, but she backed away, eyes shimmering. "I've been here with you," she said, voice rising, sharing meals, conversations, everyday life. "I believed in you, and you let me live in a fantasy, while the truth was something else entirely. Didn't you think I deserved to know?" Evan clenched his fists, voice tight like wind scraping through mountain passes. "I was scared you'd be like the rest, chasing my money, my name, not me." Cassie froze. For a moment she saw it, the ghosts in his past, fake friends, gold-digging lovers, a world that only saw dollar signs when it looked at him. But even knowing that didn't stop the hot tear sliding down her cheek. She let out a hollow chuckle. "You know what? I just wanted you to buy me a cake every week. The billions would have been a nice bonus, sure." Evan blinked, startled by her dry wit. Cassie took a shaky breath, her voice catching but strong. "If I cared about money, I wouldn't have run from a luxury wedding. I wouldn't have left behind that expensive dress, the white roses, or the so-called stable future with the powerful man my family picked for me. I wouldn't have raced into a storm looking for freedom. You really think that girl wanted your money?" Evan's eyes were glassy now, pain etched into every line of his face. "Cassie," she shook her head. "All I ever wanted was honesty, to know that when I looked into your eyes, I saw you, not a billionaire ghost hiding in the shadows." The room fell silent. Evan stepped closer, slowly, carefully, and lifted her chin with a trembling hand. In his eyes there was fear, regret, and a faint flicker of hope. I've never met anyone like you, he whispered. The only person who didn't look at me and see a bank account. Cassie looked up at him. Her smile was faint, but it was real. Then show me the real you, not the man behind locked gates and wooden walls. Just you. Evan gently curled his arms around her and pulled her into his chest. Cassie stiffened for a second, then melted into his embrace. She could hear his heartbeat, strong but shaky, like a silent confession. I'm scared of losing again, he murmured into her hair. But maybe I was wrong to think you were like the rest. Cassie closed her eyes, resting her head against his shoulder. You were definitely wrong. I don't need a fortune. Just, don't forget the cake. Evan chuckled softly, the sound a mix of bitter sweetness and something lighter. That night, Cassie lay curled up on the couch, but everything felt different. The newspaper still sat on the table, Evan's severe face staring straight into the camera. Slowly, she folded it and tucked it into the drawer. Let the world keep its headlines, she thought. Here in this house, he's not Evan Cole the billionaire. He's just Evan, the grumpy man who always leaves the toast a little too dark, but somehow makes her feel safe. She smiled to herself. And I'll show him there are things worth more than money. Upstairs in the quiet of his study, Evan sat in the golden glow of a desk lamp, eyes distant. The fear still lingered, but beneath it, something had begun to burn. A flicker, a spark Cassie had lit without even trying. And for the first time in years, Evan Cole didn't feel quite so alone. The storm that struck wasn't from the sky. It came printed in bold ink across the morning newspaper. Runaway bride Cassie Miller, hiding out in a reclusive ranch. Just below the headline was a grainy photo of Cassie, her wedding dress caked in mud, captured as she collapsed on the roadside the day she fled. Next to it was a blurry image of Evan, caught at the ranch gate as he welcomed her in. The article screamed scandal. Vincent Hale's betrayed fiancé has reportedly escaped with a mysterious recluse. Is this whirlwind romance just a cover-up for a deeper scandal? Cassie's fingers trembled as she held the paper. Her heart dropped into her stomach. No, this can't be. Her voice was barely a whisper. He found me, she breathed, her face draining of all color. Evan, standing nearby, only needed a glance at the article to know what it meant. He didn't look surprised. He'd known this day would come. He hadn't expected it to happen so soon. A thunderous knock exploded at the front door. Cassie didn't need to open it to know who stood outside. Vincent Hale, the man her family had once forced her to marry. Vincent stormed into the house like a tornado. Designer suit immaculate, tie knotted with precision, but the gleam in his eyes and that cruel smile were all too familiar. Two bodyguards flanked the door, tension flooding the room like poison. Well, Cassie, you've really outdone yourself this time. His voice was low, cold, and smug. Embarrassing me in front of the whole city? Classy. But lucky for you, I'm feeling generous. One chance to make it right. Cassie froze. Her fingers clenched tightly around the fabric of her dress. I'm not going back with you, Vincent. I'd rather... Die? He cut her off with a twisted grin. Please, spare me the drama. You might hate me, Cassie, but what about your family? Think your sick old dad can handle another media circus? One call from me and his reputation's gone. And your little sister? Still in college, right? Wonder who's footing that tuition? The words hit like knives. Cassie trembled. That was always Vincent's tactic. He used people as weapons. But before she could speak, Evan stepped forward. His voice was low and cutting, like a blade wrapped in ice. That's enough. Vincent turned, eyes flashing. So you're the hermit, the hero of this little soap opera. Do you really think you're saving anyone by hiding a runaway bride? Evan didn't flinch. He moved to stand directly in front of Cassie, his broad frame shielding her entirely. She doesn't belong to you anymore, and I won't let you hurt her again. His words landed like hammers, calm, certain, and terrifying in their clarity. Cassie blinked through her fear, stunned by the iron in Evan's voice. This man, who'd always kept his distance, who wore silence like armor, was now standing between her and the past, unflinching. Vincent let out a raspy laugh. You think you matter? You're a washed-up billionaire, a ghost of your former self. The world's forgotten you, Evan Cole. I have the press, the board, the money. What do you have? Evan looked him dead in the eye. I have the truth, and I have her. The room went still. Cassie slowly looked up, eyes glistening. That single sentence cracked something wide open inside her. Vincent's expression darkened. He tossed a bitter glare at them both. Fine. Enjoy your little romance. But remember this, Cassie. This isn't over. The next time I come back, it won't just be him who pays the price. It'll be your whole family. He threw the newspaper to the ground and turned on his heel. The door slammed behind him. Silence fell, broken only by the rain pounding against the windows. Cassie stood frozen, shoulders trembling. Evan turned, his eyes softening. He reached out as if to touch her shoulder, then stopped, hand hovering in midair. Cassie drew a shaky breath. You said I was yours. Evan's mouth opened slightly, his face uncharacteristically uncertain. He cleared his throat. I didn't want him thinking you were alone. She met his gaze, eyes sharp even through the tears. So now I'm your fake girlfriend? From runaway bride to contract girlfriend, huh? A quiet breath escaped Evan, half a sigh, half a laugh. If that's what it takes. But Cassie, he met her eyes with a steady calm. From now on, I won't let anyone touch you again. She bit her lip, overwhelmed. That strange, burning mix of fear, grief, and something dangerously close to love surged through her chest. And yet, in the eye of the storm, she felt anchored. She had found shelter. She had found Evan Cole. Rumors traveled faster than the wind. Just 2 days after Vincent stormed the estate gates, headlines exploded like fireworks. Runaway bride strikes again. Evan Cole back in the game for love? Just another PR stunt? The phone at Cole Estate rang nonstop. Reporters swarmed the gravel path to the mansion, and camera flashes burst like tiny lightning strikes. Cassie stood behind the curtain, clutching a mug of mint tea she couldn't taste. All she could feel was the metallic tang of nerves on her tongue. She had said she would face the storm, but now, with a sea of microphones waving outside, her knees betrayed her slightly. Beside her, Evan's voice was deep, steady, like an anchor. Let me speak. You only need to stand behind me. Cassie set the mug down and inhaled like she was swallowing 1,000 butterflies. No, she said. It's time I stood up for myself. I'm tired of letting others write my story. Evan looked at her. Since losing his sister, he'd learned to lock away his emotions. But Cassie, with those stubborn eyes and mischievous voice, had been quietly picking every lock. He nodded. Then I'll stand beside you. They didn't hire a backdrop or stage a show, just the stone steps in front of the porch, a mic plugged into a portable speaker, and 2 people standing shoulder to shoulder. Evan's legal team stayed at the bottom of the stairs, quietly forming a shield. Security held the crowd from pushing too close. Cassie stepped up to the mic. The chaos of the world seemed to hush, just a little. A breeze lifted a strand of her hair across her forehead. Harsh camera lights burned straight into her eyes. She swallowed and began. Good morning. I'm Cassie Miller. Yes, the runaway bride. A soft chuckle escaped her. A few murmurs rose. She looked directly at the cameras, voice steadying. I didn't run to make headlines. I didn't run to snag someone. I ran because I refused to live a life dressed up in control and abuse. I'm not in the habit of broadcasting my pain, but if staying silent means others get hurt, I'll speak. She paused, then spoke slowly, clearly. You can call me the woman who ruined $1 million wedding, but I chose to betray a lie. That night in the rain, I told myself, better to die soaked in the storm than live a life locked in a golden cage. And I followed through. The cameras held their breath. Cassie smiled, a smile no longer unsure. I know you all want to ask about Evan Cole. Yes, I know who he is, and maybe you're wondering what I want from him. My answer is simple. I want peace. I want laughter. I want to be myself, without being judged by the numbers in the bank account of the man beside me. A reporter raised a hand. Miss Miller, are you using Mr. Cole's reputation to whitewash your escape? Cassie tilted her head and answered dryly, if I wanted fame, I wouldn't have run from a chapel blasting music and waving credit cards at me. A ripple of laughter burst through the crowd. Cassie smiled and tightened her grip on the mic. She knew what she had to say next. She drew a breath, her voice suddenly warm and light as ribbon. I'd rather be poor and free than rich in chains. I don't need a perfect groom. I need someone who makes me laugh every day. And I found him. On the steps, Evan froze, as if someone had touched an old scar. He stepped forward half a pace, fingers clenching and releasing unconsciously. Some lenses swung toward him. Cassie turned, locking eyes with him among the forest of flashes. Evan stepped to the mic. He wasn't made for stages. He hated noise. But some things needed to be said out loud, so no one would ever dare touch this woman again. He stood beside her, hand resting gently on her back, a quiet shelter. I'm Evan Cole, he said, voice low but clear. And yes, I once ran a major corporation. I disappeared because of a family tragedy, and because I let ambition cost me something priceless. But I'm not hiding anymore. He looked down at Cassie, his words suddenly just for her. She is my choice, and I am hers. Cameras exploded like fireworks, but in the storm of flashes, Cassie heard only her heartbeat. She tilted her head with a soft laugh, like shrugging off fate, then leaned half an inch into his shoulder. Another reporter called out, Mr. Cole, are you returning to business? Is this just a publicity stunt? Evan pulled the mic closer. I'll return to work differently. Less noise, more purpose. I'm launching a fund for community safety and domestic violence survivors, named after my sister. And a PR stunt? If I wanted publicity, I wouldn't have let her teach me how to smile with a burned cake. Laughter rolled through the crowd. Cassie turned to him with a wink. Told you that cake had potential. From the entertainment press came another question. Miss Miller, what about your former fiancé? A flicker of tension crossed Cassie's face, but she stood tall. I've submitted evidence to Mr. Cole's attorneys and the authorities. The law will handle the rest. My family will not be threatened again. At that moment, just beyond the crowd, Cassie spotted a familiar figure. Her mother, face pale from sleepless nights, holding her sister's hand. She didn't approach, just nodded quietly. Cassie blinked. That invisible chain, once wrapped so tightly around her, had loosened. Evan noticed her gaze. He leaned over and whispered gently, You're not alone anymore. Cassie stepped up to the mic one last time. I'm not asking for forgiveness for choosing freedom. I only hope that if someone out there stands before a locked door like I once did, they'll find the courage to open it. And if they're lucky, maybe, just maybe, on the other side, they'll find a grumpy man willing to lend them an oversized hoodie. Laughter rose like a breeze. They ended it there. No grand speech, no fanfare. Evan took Cassie's hand, and together they stepped back onto the porch. A young reporter chased after them. One last question, Mr. Cole. Do you regret disappearing? Evan paused, looked at Cassie. The quiet days, the memory room, that stormy night when she rang the doorbell. All of it rushed through him in a single breath. I regret forgetting how to laugh for so long, but from today on, I'll remember. Every day. Inside, the storm of sound faded like a sealed door. Cassie let go of his hand, though her palms still tingled with warmth. She looked up at him, lips curved. You know, that burned cake comment might ruin my culinary reputation. Your reputation's soaring, Evan replied, that rare smile still in his eyes. At least with one fan. Only one? Cassie faked a scowl. I need at least two. You and the fridge. He chuckled, then turned serious. Cassie, thank you. For turning your porch into a press conference? For standing up in front of everyone and still being you. Not who they wanted you to be. Cassie blinked. She remembered the rain, the awkward kiss on wet grass, the way he shielded her from Vincent's rage. All those moments fused into a single sentence. I choose you, Evan. He didn't answer with words. He pulled her into a hug before the porch door closed, before the cameras could intrude. A simple embrace, firm and grounding, marking the boundary, the past outside, the present here. On the edge of the table, Cassie spotted a small box she hadn't opened yet. "What's this?" "Cake," Evan said plainly. "Our contract, weekly delivery." Cassie laughed aloud. Cake? Who would have thought it could become the world's most ridiculous love token? She opened the box. The white frosting was slightly smudged from the bumpy road. On top, scribbled clumsily in chocolate, were the words freedom and laughter. "Your handwriting's awful," she noted. "I'll practice," Evan said. "Every week." Cassie nodded solemnly, like signing a peace treaty. "Then it's settled. We've sealed this deal in sugar." Outside, the crowd began to disperse. On the porch, the two of them shared the first slice of the cake that marked a new life. And in that quiet, sweet moment, Cassie knew. She had stepped beyond the label of runaway bride and into her truth. A woman who chose freedom, laughter, and a man who dared to say, "I choose you," out loud to the world. On a crisp autumn morning, soft golden sunlight spilled over the wide land where once stood only Evan's somber estate. Now nestled beside the horse pasture and a line of oak trees stood a small white cottage with a brown-tiled roof, warm and picture-perfect. Hanging on a wooden sign by the door were handwritten words in delicate script: "Cassie's Corner, Cafe and Library." Cassie stood on the porch, adjusting the little chalkboard where she scribbled daily jokes to greet her customers. Today's read: "Coffee keeps you awake, books make you smile. I'll make sure you do both." She tilted her head, nodding in satisfaction. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Let's hope someone finds it funny enough to step inside. This little cafe had been Cassie's hidden dream for years, but it wasn't until she met Evan that she dared to bring it to life. 6 months ago, she'd been a runaway bride facing a media storm with a trembling heart. 6 months later, she had a home, a job she loved, and a grumpy man who somehow knew exactly how to make her laugh. Inside, the air was filled with the sweet aroma of freshly ground coffee, mingled with the musky scent of old books. Half the space was taken up by neatly arranged bookshelves, while the rest was filled with cozy round tables and soft armchairs. Cassie wanted people to sip coffee and read something wonderful, just like she had dreamed of as a little girl. Evan stepped in, tall and imposing as ever, though now there was something easier in his posture. He still had that stern gaze, but it now carried a faint smile, one Cassie knew was reserved just for her. He placed a stack of documents on the counter. "This morning, the foundation was officially approved. It will be called the Emily Cole Foundation." Cassie paused, her eyes softening. Emily, his sister, the one who left an ache in Evan's heart that words could never mend. She walked closer, gently placing a hand over his. "Emily would be proud, and you should be proud of yourself too. No more running, no more guilt. You're turning pain into something good." Evan looked into her eyes. "Without you, Cassie, I'd still be buried in that room. You dragged me out, with all your noise and ridiculous persistence." Cassie laughed and nudged his shoulder. "You make it sound like I'm some relentless mosquito." "You are," he said, deadpan, though his mouth twitched at the corners. "The only mosquito I'd never swat away." That made her blush, but deep down, her heart glowed. By afternoon, the cafe welcomed its first guests, neighbors and friends from around the area. Cassie bustled about, serving coffee, laughing and chatting. Evan stood quietly in the background, occasionally fixing a wobbly chair or fetching extra water. Mr. Cole, an elderly man, clapped him on the shoulder. "You've been smiling more since Cassie showed up. We don't see you as the grumpy boss anymore." Evan just nodded, but his eyes followed Cassie as she knelt by a group of children choosing comic books. In that moment, he knew the old man was right. Cassie had changed everything. Late that night, with the guests gone, Cassie sank into the rocking chair on the porch. A cup of hot cocoa in hand, Evan beside her in silence. His presence, as always, was steady, comforting, and the air was cool and the sound of crickets was in the distance. Cassie leaned her head back, half joking, half serious. "Hey, Evan, what if one day I decide to run away again? Will you chase after me?" Evan turned to her, a rare teasing spark in his eyes. "I won't let you run in the first place." Cassie pouted. "Oh, really?" What if I'm faster than you? He leaned closer, his voice a low murmur. Cassie, you are my home. People don't run away from home, and I'll never let myself lose you. Cassie was quiet for a beat, then smiled. You know, I used to think happiness was diamonds and extravagant parties. Now I realize it just begins with a single laugh. Evan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Then keep laughing, so I'll always have a reason to keep you. Cassie chuckled, but this time tears sparkled in her eyes. The next morning, the chalkboard outside bore a new quote from Cassie. Love is like coffee, sometimes bitter, sometimes sweet, but always wakes you up to who you really need. And just below it, in firmer handwriting, was an added line Evan had secretly scribbled. And I only need Cassie, with a weekly slice of burnt cake. Cassie read it and burst out laughing, but her heart was so warm, it didn't need a single extra grain of sugar in her morning coffee. As the sunrise bathed the little cafe in gold, laughter echoed through the air. Cassie stood behind the counter, Evan leaning beside her. Outside, customers came and went, and children giggled. They didn't need diamonds or grand banquets, just a tiny corner of the world where laughter began and would continue forever.